Good day, everybody, and welcome to our Insight Studio on brand purpose advertising. I am Paul Donato. I'm head of research at the ARF. So companies like Morning Consult and others have been tracking creative over the last couple of weeks, and it's obvious that purpose in advertising has risen faster than the virus itself. Copy that made sense 6 weeks ago is pretty irrelevant right now, isn't it? So it's my pleasure to introduce our program today, a very relevant program, starting with Walker Smith, who will be talking to us about the future of advertising and marketing. Walker is Chief Knowledge Officer, Brand and Marketing, with the consulting division of Kantar. Walker has been described by Fortune magazine as one of America's leading analysts on consumer trends. He also has a slew of awards and Hall of Fame memberships. Then Sarah Capers and I will present the study that we recently completed called Cracking Purpose. It's a framework for conducting purpose-based campaigns. Sarah leads Kantar's consulting practice, brand consulting practice, where she provides information about strategic client engagements in brand purpose, positioning, and experience design. And then we'll all be joined by Anne Green for a panel discussion and Q&A session from our virtual audience. Anne is SVP, client partner at Kantar, where she serves as advisor to all key accounts. She's worked with many of the world's leading brands to develop and implement new marketing playbooks. So let's begin our program. Please give a virtual welcome to Walker Smith.
Unmute myself. Thank you. See if we can get everything together here. So, Paul, can you see my screen there?
Loud and clear.
Perfect. All right, great. So, thanks everybody for joining. Again, my name is Walker Smith. I'm the Chief Knowledge Officer for Brand and Marketing with Kantar, and I want to kick off our discussion here today, which is kind of in two parts. I'm going to talk a little bit, and then Paul and Sarah will talk. And I want to try and set a little bit of context for the more specific issue of purpose. And this context reflects not only the pandemic that we are dealing with right now, but a bigger dynamic that has been at work in the marketplace. And I want to start with these elements that create this context within which purpose finds its place. And let's begin with what is on everybody's mind, and that is issues related to the pandemic. Now, there have been a lot of changes and a lot of impacts of the coronavirus crisis. Mostly what you see in surveys and various kinds of analyses of social media are narratives about health issues. Consumers worrying about their health, being concerned about hospital care, medical professionals. You see it here in a slide that comes from our enhanced visual analytics tool that looks and analyzes images people share on social media. But as much as people are concerned about their health, there is a bigger dynamic at work in the marketplace, and that is people's concern about the day-to-day and people's concern about the financial impact that this is going to have on their household budgets. What you see here is some data from our COVID-19 barometer, the first wave of this. We're now in our third wave, and it really compares the impact on day-to-day life about health worries. And what you see is that the bigger effect of this pandemic is a disruption to day-to-day life. And you see it not only in these kind of data, you see it in some other polling we've done at Kantar, and the almost universal concern that people are expressing about the impact that this pandemic is going to have on their pocketbooks. It is a disruption that people are feeling in a different way than concerns about public health. In fact, in some monitor research that we've done just here in the US, you see that concerns about disruption of daily routines are expressed by vastly more people than express concerns about their personal health. And that actually gives us a little insight into the proper way in which to understand what is happening right now in the marketplace, and sets the stage to understand the emergence of this bigger dynamic that is creating a context for purpose. And the way to understand what's going on in the marketplace right now is not as a disease per se, but rather as a disruption. Now, in the midst of this pandemic, we've kind of convinced ourselves that the D word that matters is the word of disease, and there is absolutely no doubt that disease is important and plays a role in how people are experiencing this crisis. But it's not disease that is really defining how people are going through the process of coming to terms with this pandemic. And that's as a disruption to their day-to-day lives, as a disruption to their household finances. And it's disruption that is unlocking the future. In fact, we can make better sense of what's happening and what it means when we think and plan in terms of disruption, not disease. And in fact, when we think of it in this way, we realize that the future after this pandemic is not uncertain, because what's ushering in the future is disruption, and we actually know how disruption works. In fact, this pandemic is the third disruption we have had since the turn of the 21st century, 3 times in the last 20 years. So we're not headed into the great unknown. As different as these 3 events have been, they are, in a sense, all the same. They are all disruptions. And we know how disruptions work. In fact, disruption is not as unusual as we might hope it would be. Now, following the end of World War II, the world settled down a good bit. A lot of things happened, but it actually seemed as if disruptions had been relegated to the history books. And if you recall, economists dubbed the period from the mid-'80s to the late 2000s as the quote-unquote Great Moderation, because it seemed as if we had reined in these kinds of big disruptions. It just turns out we were a little too swift to congratulate ourselves. Since the turn of the 21st century, we are, as you can see here, back to normal, and normal is disruption. Now, this is actually reassuring, not frightening, because as disruption, we can look back to see what's coming. Now, mind you, no 2 disruptions are alike, and this disruption is a lot bigger than some of the others we've been through. But what we have learned from the past are the ways in which disruptions work. And that's pretty clear. What disruptions do is clear the way for underlying trends that were already beginning to acquire some momentum to accelerate their emergence in the marketplace and assume mainstream dominance. In fact, we tend to overestimate kind of everything that's going on with ourselves in the moment. It seems momentous, it seems consequential, it seems revolutionary, but complete disruptions, or complete reversals, I should say, never follow a disruption. An about face is never, if you will, the phoenix rising from the ruins. Instead, what disruptions do, as I just said, is clear the way for underlying trends already taking hold to become mainstream and dominate the next wave of opportunity. Disruptions just wipe the slate clean and clear away the obstacles that have held the next big thing in check. And so the question to ask about life after the pandemic is, what was already taking hold that will now find a clear path of ascendance in the marketplace? And the answer to that question is actually pretty clear. It is this through line that you see here of the future of marketing as seen through the prism of politics and the coronavirus pandemic. It is a shift from person to public, which is to say an emerging trend of priorities from self first to society first. People are demanding that brands not just deliver a better self, but a better society as well. And the political and public health context of the moment is just going to clear the way for this to emerge even more quickly. And that's kind of the takeaway from what I'm going to say here. It's this coming era of the public. That's the post-pandemic future, and it's here already. So the emerging imperative for business is that brands must step up to do more to help society. Brands do a lot right now to help people realize their own potential and to enjoy more fulfilling lives, but consumers want brands to do that and more. They want brands to help improve society as well. And in fact, this is part of the broader social context that we see, not just the commercial context that we're planning for. One good example of that is a project that David Brooks, the conservative columnist for the New York Times, is now running with the Aspen Institute called Weave the Social Fabric Project, which is an initiative designed to study local communities and find out the ones that have been successful in rebuilding the social fabric of their local areas, and then carry those best practices to other communities so that they can do the same thing. It is all about a broader social purpose. And this is exactly what we see in a lot of the things that have roiled society in the marketplace just in the last decade or so. Perhaps the best symbol of this kind of changing mindset is Greta Thunberg, who was Person of the Year last year and has led this movement to make sacrifices, whatever it takes, even for a young person, your own education, in order to compel governments to follow through on the promises that they have made around global warming and climate change. This is a social context. And within this social context, we see a shifting commercial context. And it's worth spending just a little bit of time looking at where we're headed in the context of where we've been. So let me just spend a little time with this particular chart. Roughly speaking, marketing has seen three major areas over the last 100+ years. The first of these was the product era that began with the Industrial Revolution and lasted until the end of World War II. And it was all about the product. The material abundance that we enjoy today was scarce back then. I won't recite all those statistics, but people didn't live the kind of materially comfortable lives that we live today. So people wanted stuff and they wanted better stuff. And advertising was problem solution oriented, showing products working or delivering a unique selling proposition. One of the key figures of this advertising era was Albert Lasker, CEO of probably the best known agency at the time, Lord and Thomas. It's now known as FCB. Lasker invented the job of copywriter. So if you're a copywriter, you owe your job to Albert Lasker, and he articulated a very strict philosophy about what copywriters should do, and that is write about the product. And his creative philosophy was called the quote unquote preemptive claim, which was later revised and modified and updated by Rosser Reeves, who was the chairman of Ted Bates, as the unique selling proposition. These are product-centric ideas. But this era of the product turned out to be a victim of its own success. As stuff became more pervasive and more familiar, talking about stuff became less engaging, and it became almost commoditized. This coincided with a values revolution in the 1960s, and suddenly people wanted brands that were all about them. Advertising began talking about the person who bought the product, not simply the product itself. And buying became a pathway to a better self, out of which emerged the creative era of advertising. And there were several key figures back during that heyday. David Ogilvy was probably one of the first with the Man in the Hathaway shirt. It was about being a man like that by buying that brand. Bill Bernbach was another leading figure of this era, especially with his groundbreaking Think Small campaign for Volkswagen. What was wrong with the product? It was too small, was exactly right for the person who could embrace that kind of rule breaking. And another key figure was Bill Backer, who created that legendary Hilltop ad for Coca-Cola. And that ad was actually Coke's response to the pioneering Pepsi Generation campaign that pioneered this idea of selling the attributes of the people buying the product, not the product itself. Buying as a pathway to a better self. Now, a lot has happened during this time. Agency conglomerates, the internet, digital, these have been important, but these are best understood as kind of financial and technological refinements to the creative selling of brands to make you a better person. Now, product didn't go away, still had to deliver a good product, and person was certainly important, but you have to do something in addition to that now. And that something else is the era to come, the one that the pandemic will usher in even faster. And it will be an era that is more about society than simply what you own or who you are. It will be about brands that contribute to the public good. People still want brands that deliver a product that makes you a better person, but they now expect brands to contribute to a better society as well. And this is a shift, if you will, from good over greed, but the broader context is an upheaval in purpose and the opportunities created by that to build bigger brands by building a better society. Indeed, one way to think about this is a shift in values that has occurred over this 50-year period in which we saw this era of the person. This first shift that we saw occurred in the mid-1960s, and political scientists refer to it as a de-alignment, because beginning in about 1965, they noticed in survey data for the first time in decades that people were identifying less with major political parties and more as independents. They were de-aligning their identity with bigger institutions. And it wasn't just politics, it was every institution, whether it was government or mainline religious denominations or universities, medicine, journalism, big companies, you name it. And we went through really a 50-year period in which the orientation was more about self. Self-absorption, self-discovery, self-fulfillment, self-expression, self-actualization. It was all very person-oriented. And economics and management theory changed as well. The kind of benevolent corporate paternalism preached by people like Peter Drucker gave way to the free market philosophy of people like Milton Friedman and all of the freshwater schools of economics that he inspired. People had permission to think only of self, and this way of thinking has been dominant really for the last 50 years. But beginning with the turn of the century and really taking hold after the financial crisis of the early 2010s, we saw another shift. We didn't see self going away so much as we saw thinking of others becoming much more important. And so now others are not given a backseat to self. Instead, others have an equal position in the way in which people are approaching their lives and in the expectations that they have for brands. Now, of course, this didn't happen all at once. This is a shift that has taken some time to emerge, but it is now a big change for brands and for marketers that they must start to embrace, particularly as we think about life after the pandemic. In fact, we have even seen this not just in broader philosophies and values, but even in the ways in which the marketplace works. For example, the importance of others in buying and shopping has become much more critical, particularly with digital and social digital tools. And that's a new orientation that, again, is less about self per se and more about bringing others into the mix. In fact, this whole idea of the public and of society and of others is a new ethic for brands. Whatever personal ethic people may have for themselves, this is an ethic that they are expecting brands to follow through on. They want brands to deliver a better society and to have this focus on public roles and public goods. And you see this very clearly in survey data about brand expectations. In just the last few years, we have gone from about half of consumers worldwide expecting brands to take a bigger role in society to now 2/3, demanding that brands be committed to contributing to a better society by assuming this kind of public role. And it's not just our data at Kantar. The conference board completed a big study in 64 markets that was published just about 6 or 7 weeks ago. And one of their major findings was that for consumers around the world, governments don't live up to their public roles anymore, and they are looking increasingly to companies and brands to fill this role. And we have seen lots of activity on this front. Perhaps the most notable was the recent shift by the Business Roundtable in its statement of mission and purpose, which historically was only about shareholders, but now includes all stakeholders as well. We have seen this too when it comes to things like sustainability. And in fact, we have even seen an articulation of sustainable objectives that reflects a new economics around sustainability. Larry Fink, CEO of BlackRock, in his most recent letter to CEOs, said it is now clear by their calculations that the cost of doing nothing about global warming will outweigh the savings from doing nothing about global warming. So there are new pressures in the marketplace that are demanding that brands take a different approach to purpose in their public role. And in fact, we've even seen some controversy about this. The Nike ad with Colin Kaepernick about believe in something even if it means sacrificing everything highlighted a lot of the divides in the ways in which people view purpose and the ways in which brands should deliver that. But that controversy itself is reflective of this changing expectation about brands that is slowly beginning to take hold. In fact, it also illustrates one of the paradoxes and challenges that brands face, and that is consumers want brands to take a stand without really taking a side. And that, of course, requires then that brands figure out some way to straddle this divide, figure out how they can do this without alienating lots of customers in the marketplace. And I won't get into all the particulars about this, but there are certainly some ways to do that. Health is one of them. A local focus is another. And as you can see here at the bottom of this slide, the pandemic is putting a new gloss on both of them. We're now headed to a future of hygiene as a unifying factor in a public role for brands and self-sufficiency at the same time. Of course, the other paradox that brands face in doing this is that even as consumers say they trust brands and big institutions less, they are demanding more of them. They want them to do more. So this is something that says to brands, it's not an easy thing to do. You don't necessarily have permission just to step into this without doing some of the hard work first. But brands can fill this role. And in fact, brands are fairly well regarded by consumers. In our tracking of share gains just here over the last month or so, we see it as the biggest brands with the biggest reputations that are enjoying the most gains. Big brands that consumers trust are the ones that are succeeding during this pandemic. And in fact, we see when brands are compared to governmental institutions, brands are viewed much better. As you see here on the left, big corporations viewed better than the federal government in the US. As you see here in the middle, local businesses viewed better than state and local governments. And when consumers talk to us about the things they expect from brands, as you can see here at the top of the list, it's all about things in a public role. It's not about selling person or product. It's all about delivering something for a better society in this public role. And only 8% think brands should stop advertising. But when you ask the 92% what brands should be advertising, it's all about the public role, being helpful, being informative about what brands are doing to face this situation, and offering some kind of reassuring tone. And in fact, we see lots of brands beginning to step up to that role in the marketplace. There is a lot of public good for brands to do. And you can see some examples here on the left. These examples are now about a couple of weeks old, so I won't get into all of those. There are dozens more examples of things like this that have emerged just over the last couple of weeks. But this smattering of examples are brands that are showing a positive social example in a marketplace in which increasing pressures are being put on people, and people are feeling perhaps more divisive than ever, not more together than ever. People are understanding their connection with other people, but it is often being perceived by people as more about what you can do to me as opposed to what I can do for you. And brands are being asked to step into this role to provide a better example. Additionally, brands are just being asked to deliver social goods. And so there are lots of examples of brands that are converting their production facilities and their delivery of products and services to fill critical gaps in the marketplace. And these could well become bigger opportunities for these brands going forward. I'll give you one last example, and then I'll kind of wrap it up with one final thought. Here's an example of a brand that, makes processed meat for steak sandwiches, Steak-'em. It's a pretty big brand, grocery store brand, processed food brand, all of those kinds of things you could say that might make it seem like a brand that is something that wouldn't be able to enjoy this kind of a public role. And yet what Steak-'em has done with its Twitter feed during this pandemic is to step up into a public role and contribute to a better society by delivering factual, accurate information about things related to the coronavirus and actively campaigning against misinformation. And it's been doing such a good job that it has even gotten recognition and endorsement from other kinds of medical and health institutions. So that's the kind of role that consumers expect. And that's the kind of role that is very much related to purpose. This era of the public accelerates the importance of purpose. Purpose reinforces the necessity for this public role. Public then puts purpose front and center in the marketplace, and purpose becomes the mission that companies must pursue in this era of the public when they are being asked not only to deliver a great product that helps me be a better person, a more fulfilled person, but also contributes to a better society. Thank you very much. And let me now turn it over to Paul and to Sarah.
Thank you very much. That was awesome, Walker. I can't help but think some of the data that you showed, some of the latest data was in mid-March. I can't help but think that every week since then, this brand ethic has gotten stronger and stronger. So let me now introduce Cracking Purpose. It's a study that Kantar and the ARF worked on. Very good. I see my slides are up. Thank you. Carolyn, you'll be driving for me. This study was intended to create a framework for people who were developing purpose-based campaigns. So obviously very relevant, and we're here right when we should be. I'm going to give a short introduction, and then Sarah's going to take you through the study. I want to say that some reports are meant to be read, and some reports are meant to be studied. This is really the latter. Basically, Sarah will give you the highlights as we go through, but by all means, shortly after, I think around 2 o'clock, the study will be up on our website. Download it and study it. I've gone through the report many times, and every time I go through it, I get a different idea in terms of how to think about things. So a little bit of background on what we know about purpose already. So next slide, please. Thank you very much. A lot of what we know actually comes from award ceremonies. Most of the reporting that has been done comes out of either Ogilvy Awards, the Walk Awards, or Cannes Lions. This study is different because, yes, we did look at the award winners, but we also did social listening. So we identified those purpose campaigns which were less successful or indeed in some cases had a negative reaction. Next slide. As with all creative, it really starts with strategy. One of the major reasons that winners of purpose awards or creative awards fail is because they may be great creative, but they're just not consistent with the strategy of the campaign. There's got to be a very tight link between the brand and the message, the purpose message. You can't make the consumer think too hard. It's got to be obvious why the brand is taking this point of view. And of course, as with all creative, emotion now is much more effective than the more rational approaches that would have been associated with more sales activation. Next slide. So about 5 years ago, the Boston Consulting Group put out a report, an excellent report on purpose advertising. They did, however, suggest that in analyzing corporate reports, that the frequency with which corporate reports were identifying purpose-based campaigns was going down, suggesting that the heyday of purpose was really about 2010 to 2012. Well, that is obviously not the case right now, although it may have been declining slightly during the late teens. Darren Coleman suggests the reason for that is that it's very difficult to distinguish between the various components of purpose. Brand purpose, brand value, brand essence, mission, corporate social responsibilities. They're all different dimensions, and which one you're actually calling purpose depends, I guess, on the nature of the campaign. For the purpose of this study, we're going to go very broad in terms of how we define purpose. Let's see. So if we take a look at the awards programs, basically they will suggest that there needs to be an authenticity, that there needs to be a direct link between the brand and the purpose-driven outcome. You'll see in the presentation a number of examples. One of the ones that I want to call out was HP's. It was one of the candidates for the Ogilvy Awards last year. It was a 4-minute digital video. The purpose of the campaign was really to introduce sales or raise sales for their photo printer, which had been really lagging. A 4-minute video on what people thought the average American family looked like. And it should not surprise you that most people had no idea what the average American family looked like. The printer was only on screen for 4 seconds, and yet it was responsible for a substantial increase in the sales of the photo printer. So another theme that's very important is that purpose-based campaigns also have to be commercially successful. And in this particular case, strong purpose-driven campaign, but also very commercially successful. So next slide. Just going to introduce you to some of the data. This comes from an excellent report, Walk's Effective Use of Brand Purpose report. Purpose campaigns, there's a lot more data in that report, so I also suggest that you pull that down if you're involved in a purpose-based campaign. Typically, purpose-based campaigns have lower budgets. That's probably because there's a lot of PSAs which are using purpose-based campaigns. That is likely also why most purpose-based campaigns use television. First of all, television is one of the most effective uses of media for the use of emotional content, and the PSAs are probably getting the TV time for little or no. The chart itself shows that emotion and sustainability are the creative strategy of choice for purpose-based campaigns. The two color bars on the left are basically all submissions for the walk campaigns, and the bars on the right, the dark blue bars, are the short lists, or the ones most likely to win the campaigns. And so again, sustainability, responsibility, and emotion are creative approaches of choice. And you can go to the next screen. Why do advertisers use purpose? Brand strength and appeal, the most frequently given reasons or objectives of the campaign. Nonprofits, more often than not, seek behavioral change, stop smoking, other health-related issues. When we looked at our own Ogilvy database, what we found is that behavioral change was most frequently listed among the Ogilvy applicants for purpose-based campaigns. So that was a little bit of background, what we know, and now I'd like to introduce my colleague, Sarah Capers from Kantar, who will bring you through the Cracking Purpose report.
Thank you so much, Paul. I'm just going to share my screen, so give me one moment. Okay, great. And you can see my screen, correct?
Yes, we can.
Awesome, thank you. Okay. So really excited to share these findings out with you all, and to kind of just reiterate what Paul said. This really is meant to be studied, so I'm going to run through the report, but we encourage you to spend more time with it on your own. I won't reference every case study that we're showing in this, just for the interest of being able to get through it all and save time for the Q&A. So yeah, excited for you all to spend some time with it later as well. Our approach. So, you know, I think the sort of why of purpose is clear in what's been discussed both by Paul and Walker, but how you do that and what the strategies are for best-in-class purpose execution is really what we wanted to kind of understand. How could we give marketers a framework for executing on purpose and avoid the pitfalls? And so in order to do that, as Paul mentioned, we gathered a cross-section of campaigns. So we wanted to look at campaigns that garnered consumer interest and also campaigns that were categorized as purpose. And that was, you know, in some mention of purpose within the campaign, which cast a wide net. And from there, we identified those, of course, through social listening, utilizing that base, and also a review of a number of different industry awards. And it was from there that we really wanted to select our campaigns for diversity. So we wanted to look at campaigns with positive responses and mixed responses, global campaigns, local campaigns, so that we could get this sort of diverse corpus of material to analyze and really understand what was happening across and transversely across these campaigns and what the biggest learnings were. So we narrowed down to 45 campaigns to use as that corpus of our analysis. And we analyzed those campaigns from across different lenses. So we looked at it from the brand, like what this brand is about and how does it relate to the campaign, you know, if it was tapping into culture, and looking at how it was addressing changing human attitudes, and its impact, the impact of the campaign in terms of brand equity, as well as the social impact. And then coupling our own analysis, we spoke with brand or campaign owners and folks that were kind of in the space with the campaign and understanding the environment that enabled successful purpose campaigns to be born. And it was really that combination that fed into the key findings. So without further ado, I'll take you through the takeaways. And we worked hard to make sure that to kind of get this down, boil it down to something succinct and actionable so that this study can be used as a sort of toolkit in campaign execution. So what is the best-in-class framework? It's really starting with you. So we hear authenticity is important. It is important. And the apple really shouldn't fall far from the tree in this case. But it's not only about you, it also is about them. So centering people and not your brand, involving people in your process of campaign creation and campaign execution, giving them something to do, and helping them to tell their own story. And then it really is about the world. So this is not, it's thinking bigger, and it's making the world a better place through solving problems and, you know, engaging in important cultural conversations, and perhaps most importantly, committing to long-term impact. So what is this you really about, and how do we do it? The campaign should have precedent, should connect to the core of your business. And if you do those things well, it should feel in retrospect like an obvious move. So in our conversation with the EVA initiative, the folks that brought that to life, Sophia Lindholm and Carl Rosenforce, they said, if you think doing purpose is risky, it's probably because you're being inauthentic. A strong statement, but I think one for all of us to consider as we're considering any cause that we're aligning with. It really should feel like a natural extension of the brand. And how we make sure to do that is having precedent as a starting point. So if you have a history of working for a cause, you've got a right to play when activating on it. In our conversation with Ben Wicks, he said when she shared, when she saw the campaign with the great-great-granddaughter, Cadbury's founder wrote to us, she was so pleased that we decided to return to the ethos in which the brand was founded. And so there's a glass and a half in everyone is a Cadbury campaign that really leans into these small acts of kindness and generosity that was the spirit of Cadbury's founding family that were Quaker philanthropists. So a return to a precedent within the brand that could spark an idea for a campaign and also gives a lot of credibility. So Chipotle's For Real and Omo's campaign as well get back to something that they'd previously done with the campaign and that was in the DNA of the brand. An internal precedent can also inspire external campaigns. So Carrefour's The Black Supermarket was an initiative to champion or to fight against an EU legislation that made it more difficult for local farmers to sell in supermarkets. And they hadn't really done this sort of advocacy externally before, but their CSR mission internally around sustainable development and agriculture kind of paved the way for them to be able to activate externally. So they'd already they became aware of this and had already been activating in the space of sustainable development from an internal level, and they brought it to an external facing audience with that campaign very successfully. And we'll talk about the Universal Love campaign in a bit. When tackling something new, doing something kind of closer in or incremental can help build precedent. So we probably all recognize the Best the Man Can Be campaign, which really addressed toxic masculinity on the national stage. But this wasn't the first time that Gillette had engaged in that conversation. So the brand had used its Father's Day campaign to tell stories that highlighted evolving manhood, and had partnered with organizations dedicated to the well-being of the next generation of men. So there had already been building precedent within the organization in order to make that large kind of call for the best that men can be on the national stage. So beyond the precedent, it really should connect to the core. So that central proposition of the brand that makes it ownable and distinctive. John Sullivan in our conversation, purpose campaigns have to be related to your core business. And by doing that, it really is differentiated, right? So it's something that's truly different and ownable, and it also is credible for the campaigns. So the REI Opt Outside campaign, which REI's entire purpose is around inspiring a lifetime of outdoor adventure and stewardship. So the decision of their Opt Outside campaign, which has been going since 2014, it directly connects to that by helping people get outside literally on the day of saying, like, instead of Black Friday, we're going to go and spend time outdoors. Directly connects to that proposition, as does the Ball in Her Court for Bumble, which has always been about women making the first move. And the We Accept campaign by Airbnb, which has always been about helping people belong no matter where they are in the world. And so aligning with a cause that isn't directly connected to the brand's core proposition doesn't mean it isn't doing good in the world, but it makes it harder to own and be truly kind of differentiated and recognizable to consumers. So it can be overlooked. And this Herbalife's hashtag Missing Type campaign, so they partnered with the American Red Cross along with other brands to bring awareness to blood shortages, an incredibly powerful initiative, but didn't perhaps do what it could have done for Herbalife had it been more connected directly to the core of the brand. So if you do those first two things well, it should feel like an obvious move in retrospect. We like to call it the duh factor. Like, does it make immediate and obvious sense to your consumers that your brand? And a great example of something like the duh factor at play, The Truth is Hard. So New York Times is known for being one of the most well-trusted and well-known news sources. The choice to do the Truth is Hard campaign, where they're advocating for integrity in journalism, made total sense for the brand. And when it causes a little bit of a stretch, so it's not in the heartland of who you are, it can open up the brand to receive either confused or critical reactions. So it doesn't mean that it won't, the Lush hashtag Spy Cops campaign, quite a cry from its fun and luxurious beauty products that take care of the world and community. It looked at undercover cops and human rights abuses by them. So pretty far. It did receive a lot of conversations around it, so generated response. Some people really liked it, some people didn't like it, but it definitely opened it up to criticism because it wasn't close to the heartland of the brand. So this is done really, really well. It can look like the EVA initiative that Volvo did. So there was an interesting insight that most car manufacturers use safety data that's based on the adult male body, but Volvo had in fact been kind of collecting data about safety data on all different types of body types, and they released that to the industry for its open use and for public use. And this had precedent. So this actually, in a large way, was a celebration of the release of the seatbelt. So Volvo invented the seatbelt in 1959, and instead of patenting it, they gave it to the industry to use so that the safety standards of the entire industry would rise. And EVA campaign likewise did that. And it was a sort of, like I said, celebration of that choice. Linking to the brand's core, Volvo is about safety. It's one of the core differentiating factors of who the brand is. And so when you couple those two pieces together, it's an obvious move for the brand. So in the conversation, we heard from the creative directors, everyone knows Volvo is a leader in safety. That's why they're the one manufacturer that could do this. So in this study, we've given you some questions to ask yourself so that you can kind of workshop your own campaigns. I won't go into them, but I encourage you to consider them and take them seriously as you're exploring your next initiatives. So it is important to be grounded in who you are, but it really also is critical to make it about them. It's not all about you. And so how we do that is we partner with the people who care. We let them tell their story, and we give people something to do. Tessa Cosenza, when we spoke with her about the MGM campaign, she said, we partnered with people who were passionate about the cause and let them run with it. And we'll talk about that at the end as a sort of exceptional example of this. So partnering with the people who care, and are affected by the cause that you're trying to forward. When we spoke with Patagonia, it was really illuminating to hear, they're in so many ways a gold standard for many of us in the industry about what purpose can look like. She let us know, Corley Canna, when we spoke with her, that it's not that Patagonia comes up with these ideas all on their own about how best to activate, but they, support a number of grassroots nonprofits that forward environmental activism, and that it's from those relationships that they're really able to glean interesting campaign and advocacy ideas. And so it's not something that they do wholly on their own. So partnering with the people that care really gives us a kind of insight into what the most relevant areas and executions might look like. So involving real people can lead to really interesting insights. And when we spoke with the campaign owners for the National Geographic campaign, they shared that, you know, National Geographic has a network of explorers across the world, and over 15 years, essentially, they had been hearing increasingly about plastic as they were out on their expeditions. And so, although they had never taken a really strong activist stance as a brand before, after hearing this for so long, they decided it was really critical that they make the move, which was the inspiration for their Planet Our Plastic. And people are most invested in their own stories. We love to hear about ourselves, and the centering those people at the heart of the campaign is a great way of allowing them to really be the hero of the story rather than the brand. And the Vodafone Seniors for Seniors campaign addressed seniors feeling left behind by technology, but instead of kind of Vodafone helping seniors, they hired seniors to be the customer reps for other seniors to allow them to kind of steward them into a new relationship with technology while allowing that specific demographic to also be the hero of the story. And letting them tell their own stories too, and using their authentic voice. This was done really well by the Mom On campaign, celebrating different ways to parent. Part of that campaign included a mom's tips hotline where people could call in and share their own stories and really contribute to what this means. So giving people ownership and allowing them to participate by authoring aspects of the campaign is one way to let them share their voice. And not just talking, but giving them something to do. So when a campaign becomes a real experience, people can participate. And when we spoke with Deepak Masand at HP about their Get Real campaign, he shared that we created real printable content, including games, recipes, and more to help people step out from behind their screens and spend quality time with family. So real tangible things to do. And we can do that in many different ways. We can give people a platform like the In Our Hands from the Body Shop. We can give them something to buy, like the Adaptive Controller, this incredible tool that makes gaming more accessible in the We All Win campaign. And we can give them something to fight for, as is true with the opt-out side, like we spoke about. So when this is done really well, we have an example like MGM Resorts Universal Love campaign. So they recognized that much of mainstream entertainment left out LGBTQ+ folks. And they decided to switch up the genders of classic love songs in order to be more applicable to same-sex couples. And to do this, they really wanted to start a conversation within the industry. So they went out and had conversations with their kind of creative partners and artists in the LGBTQ community to start having this conversation. And then they decided to actually bring those artists in to make this album. So instead of mandating this is how we're going to do this, they did like a call out to artists and said, how should we bring this to life? And really let the artists run with it. When we spoke with Tessa, she shared with us that Keisha had brought her own song to us to include on that album. It wasn't on their list. So really allowing them to author the story gives it its own just realness, I think, and accessibility that lends authenticity to the campaign, and giving them something to do. So at the very heart and core of this, which was an album, so it gives people a piece of music and much music to enjoy with their friends at home, but it also included an activation, which I loved, around a karaoke session where you could choose the pronouns you wanted for your song. So it took it even farther, giving them something really that they could do themselves and participate in. So some questions to think about when you go to build this campaign out. And the last piece, so purpose campaign is no good if it doesn't actually do good. And we really want to solve problems that are important. In this moment, it's more important than ever, perhaps. Tap into culture and really be in it for the long haul. So again, there's so many ways to activate on purpose, but one of the ways that we saw consistently work was solving tangible problems. And part of that is because when you solve a problem, you're making a promise and you're delivering on that promise in the same sentence. Campaigns that solve problems really boost credibility because they're delivering on that promise. And this happens in multiple ways. It can happen through product innovation, as was the case with IKEA Visibles, which utilize 3D printing to create add-ons to their existing furniture and make them more accessible to differently abled folks, as the non-product innovation like Rexona, where they essentially built a movement app, so an app that created more mobility for folks with disabilities, in partnering with a car service, and then activations like ARF, so advocating on behalf of a problem that was affecting farmers for legislation that would solve that. And so many campaigns that solve a problem for a specific group that's underserved have broader appeal, and we know this, right? It's for multiple reasons. It taps into a cultural conversation surrounding a group, as is the case around the LGBTQ+ community, and it also builds our empathic response. So just because we're talking about a specific cohort of people doesn't make a campaign really accessible to a broader set. Tapping into culture to build resonant campaigns for today is really, really critical. So to have that sort of social impact that we talked about, you have to be tapping into what's happening today. And it can be hard to, when we spoke with Jeff Stamp, if your brand inhabits a specific space, sometimes we're called to talk about those things. He said, it's hard to get through this decade without having a conversation about how masculinity is changing. The cultural tension around the subject is what made it strong. So cultural tensions that are timely can really elevate a campaign to the level of national discourse. The New York Times campaign, The Truth is Hard, was tapping into, in 2017, the height of disinformation and fake news. So it made the idea of a news source we could trust even more potent. And culturally resonant topics can also be divisive. And so if we are leaning into something where there is a lot of charge, we can expect big reactions that sometimes are polarized. As we remember from the Nike campaign that there were polarized reactions. I think by and large, everyone would say that was highly successful for many reasons. And depending on your brand, taking a stand can be done in a subtler way. I think this is such a fantastic execution on behalf of Lego. They really are taking a stand on this campaign around rebuilding the world, of constructing new visions of what the world can be, and they depicted really, and in a way that was very true to Lego, kind of progressive ideas around gender inclusiveness and environmentalism throughout that campaign, which it seems it's subtle in some way, but can make a huge impact on, for example, a kid who's seeing this ad. Choosing a culturally relevant cause isn't enough, so we also want to bring in kind of cultural relevance in the execution and the sort of style of the campaign. And this was done really well in the Equal Sweat, Equal Pay campaign that was looking at pay inequality in the Women's World Cup. They really channeled that cultural tone of female empowerment, of bold and direct transparency, and sort of declarativeness of the campaign, which really echoed so much that was happening in the #MeToo movement and other elements of women's empowerment. And lastly, but certainly not least, our biggest problems are not created overnight, and they won't be solved overnight either. So this is really an invitation for purpose campaigns to be in it for the long haul. In our conversation with the Volvo folks, it's not just a finished campaign, it's the start of an ongoing project to change the world. That's how we build long-term equity. And it's also how we really do solve those problems and do create social impact. So avoid being a one-off stunt, really campaigns do good in a way that lasts. So when Levi's really sought to encourage voter registration during the 2016 elections, they are relaunching for the 2020 elections and plan to carry that into the future, recognizing that we're not going to achieve this overnight. And I'd say all of the campaign owners that we spoke with, there was an element of thinking about this, not just for today, but really in the long term of how can we change the conversation? How do we continue to push forward these efforts? And a crowning, version of that is Patagonia's the Fight for Public Lands campaign, which is part of a long-term effort in kind of preserving the environment. They have been protecting Bears Ears National Monument against its public lands, against the government's move towards privatization. And Patagonia even brought a lawsuit against the Trump administration for those actions. So it definitely was solving a problem, right? Protecting public lands. This is, privatizing the lands is a threat to Indigenous people. It's a threat to the environment. It's also a threat to just like the natural beauty of public land and its accessibility to all Americans. It also tapped into culture in like its tonal, bold, declarative, the president stole your land statement, especially, at this moment in 2017, where there was growing resentment around environmental issues and commitment for the long haul. So I think, it might sound like, wow, how could a brand make, the choice to sue the administration? Interesting. And this was an incredibly, great into the conversation we had with Corley Kenna of Patagonia, that they had actually been for years lobbying on behalf of Bears Ears and had an effort to pressure the Obama administration to declare it as a national monument. 2017 was supposed to be the year where they celebrated their kind of achievement of protecting the land, and then it went under threat again. So they felt like they had no other choice but to move action. And so the campaign really was the extension of them being in it for the long haul. And yeah, so of committing to that causes no matter what happens. So some questions to ask yourself. Summary of the big three. So be you, do something that feels like a no-brainer given who you are, and yet center everything around them, partner with the people who care, something to do, let them tell it themselves, and then, do something for the world. So understanding the problems that need to be solved, the cultural context we're swimming in, and how do we make those changes for today and tomorrow. And that is it. So thank you all. I will stop sharing.
Super, thanks so much, Sarah. And Carolyn, if you bring up all of the panelists, and we're going to be joined by Anne Green now. Welcome, Anne. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Anne and I are going to play both kind of hosts, but also participate in the conversation. I'm going to start us off with a quick question, and then we'll go to the questions which were submitted during the course of the presentations. So all of the research says that advertising during a recession, those who do it come out of the recession much better. All the research says that advertising after a crisis like 9/11, advertisers that do it come out of it much better. So we know it's a good thing to advertise in this time. One of the questions that came in from our virtual audience was, what's a finance company to do? A finance company that, for example, might be more used to advertising services and interest rates. I'd like the panelists to think about sort of the three stages. We're currently in acute. Most people think next is recovery, and after that, the new normal. If I'm a finance institution and I don't have a precedent to rely on, like an REI, is it too late for me? How do I think about the three periods moving forward: acute, recovery, and then new normal? I'll start. How about Walker? You can start.
Okay. That's just because I look old enough to have lived through the Great Recession, I guess. And there were a few notable successes during that period of time. But, as a company in general, I think now is a time to celebrate people who are making sacrifices on behalf of others. And I don't mean celebrating your employees, which a lot of companies have done, and that's not a bad thing, because there are a lot of employees that are taking some risk in order to keep the economy going. But I think companies should be in the business of talking about other people, not themselves right now. The more you talk about yourself, the more self-serving you're going to appear to be. And that's going to strike the wrong tone with consumers. Now, that's the moment. What we are looking ahead to now is this issue of re-entry or reactivating the marketplace. And there are a number of things that are going to have to take place in order for that to occur. You know, to some extent, we have never, ever been in a situation like we're in now. But there are a lot of things that companies can do for themselves that they can help accomplish by doing proper advertising. So, for example, one of those things is giving consumers confidence in the marketplace and in the economy, enough confidence in their lifestyles, enough confidence in the future that consumers are willing to spend as if there is a future, and they don't need to hoard every dollar and cent right now. And there is actually a demonstrated and quantified relationship between companies that can make these kinds of investments, both in what they say and what they do, and in the ability of consumers to then gain confidence from that, to spur them to go back to participating in the marketplace. This unwillingness of consumers to buy is going to be one of the single biggest problems to overcome as we go into a recovery phase. And I think a lot of advertising is going to have to inspire confidence in the future in order to get consumers back out into the marketplace.
I would take that one step further, and that we tend to think about the role of advertising today, as you talked about, Paul, and whether or not it's right to advertise. But in the question itself, it refers to services. What can brands like financial services actually do these days? And so I would really encourage marketers to think about the experiences they are creating. So not necessarily just to talk about themselves, but to really ensure that when it comes to customer service and all the different ways in which they can interact with individuals during what is truly an economic crisis is done well and in a thoughtful way. So really to think beyond the advertising to the experience.
Super. Sarah, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think you shared about precedent and what can brands do to establish a precedent in this moment. And I think it is, you know, kind of ironic. We're in a very, in certain ways, unprecedented moment with the global pandemic. And I think that for brands that perhaps haven't taken an active stance with purpose, beginning to act with purpose in this moment, provided that you aren't using it as an opportunity for self-promotion, but instead really thinking about how can I build meaningful awareness in this moment? How can I inspire customers to be having, you know, making the most of what this time is at home? Or how can I really be taking actions that are going to contribute to what's essential need of right this moment, and doing that in a way that foregrounds the impact that they're making, and kind of, it's almost like whatever it does for me as a brand is really secondary. If you do that in this moment, at a later stage, you're building precedent where you can then take that, and it's like, this is where we started to leverage this. And now we get to do it at a different scale as we move forward in outside of the sort of acute and critical phase.
It's funny, Walker, you mentioned make the advertising about your employees and what they do. One of the two most memorable ads right after 9/11 was the United family. And if you think about travel suffering right now, it suffered just as much after 9/11. And basically it was about a 90-second ad of just United employees introducing themselves. Very successful ad. The other probably most successful ad was the Budweiser ad that was shown during the Super Bowl.
Right.
I have a place in my heart for it. If you don't remember the ad, it was the Clydesdales going through every town in the country. And then eventually they wound up in Liberty State Park, right across from what was the World Trade Center, and all the Clydesdale kneel. So really tapping sort of patriotism and emotion. So I think that, I don't think it's ever too late. The United family didn't have a precedent, actually. It's much easier if you have a precedent, which actually leads me to another question, and that is REI. It has a strong precedent and purpose. What does REI do in its current advertising? Or what would you suggest? What would anybody suggest?
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure if everybody saw the communication that came out from the REI.
It's a trick question. I was waiting to see if someone.
It really is a thing of beauty, because I do think it stays true to their purpose, but it really puts the face of their employees into that situation, what they are doing to return to quote unquote normalcy in their business. And one of the things I've observed as a whole is how CEOs are actually taking more of a role today in expressing the humanity of these brands. So really, how can they take their purpose beyond something that is what the brand is all about to what this individual stands for? And I think brands like REI and Delta have done that really well.
Yeah. I just got the email this morning, but I think also one of the provisions was, so REI is a co-op and you get dividend points that are worth money. And they're asking people to donate their points towards, I think the program is 100,000 masks or something, but what they will do is buy protective equipment for first responders with all the points that people donate.
Yeah.
Super.
Yeah.
Okay. And any questions that you might want to raise?
Well, I think there's an interesting one here in terms of, we hear a lot about these are unprecedented times. We are here for you. And it is a serious moment in time. We are dealing with, what is truly a serious moment of disruption. But one of the questions that came in was, is there a place for humor in today's world? Or is it going to be completely tone deaf if I try to address this situation in a lighthearted fashion?
Well, that's a testable hypothesis, obviously. So it may depend on the kind of joke you're telling. I think if it's self-deprecating humor, I think you're more likely to be able to get away with it. And I think it would be self-deprecating humor related to your efforts to make a contribution and how you may be stumbling along, but you're still trying to do the right thing. I think that kind of humor could possibly work. But I certainly don't think humor should be your first instinct in this moment. I mean, there are an unprecedented number of people who have lost their jobs. The second quarter of this year is going to be probably the worst quarter in the measured history of the U.S. economy. I think the ripple effects of what has occurred just in the last few weeks are going to unfold over the next few weeks. So I hate to say it, but I don't think we've seen the worst of the economic impacts yet. So I think, we ought to be focusing on trying to help, trying to provide resources, trying to fill in gaps, and trying to help people get through this moment. There will be a time later when we can look back on it with a smile, but that time is not now.
Yeah, I would echo. Oh,
Go ahead, Sarah.
I just would echo that. I mean, I think this is a time to really lean into, being reassuring, but not overly positive. And if you're doubting something that this doesn't, may this not work. I mean, testing is great, but just following the intuition of this moment, which is that humor is probably riskier than something else.
Yeah.
And I would just add a footnote to just echo something I said a moment ago. What consumers need most now is reassurance about the future. they need to understand that just to say it again, that they need to understand that they shouldn't be putting all their money in their mattress. And if you want a job for your advertising, reassure consumers about the future. Give them some sense of confidence that the future is something they should invest in by spending some money now. And that is going to be a crucial requirement for this recovery to really accelerate. And so that's where I would look, as opposed to trying to do something clever with the brand.
And this is where I love what Verizon has done. It has created new webinars for small businesses. And it's really designed to give them confidence and reassurances in the path forward. Give them information that may not have been already accessible or easily accessible to them so that they can chart the course for their future. And I think that that's been really smart how they've done that.
Walker, you mentioned the Hilltop ad for Coca-Cola. As I remember, that ad starts with one person, looks like social distancing, and ends up not social distancing long before we knew what that was. What is creative in general going to look like in the future? Are people going to be wearing masks in creative? Will we ever have 100 people on the Hilltop again?
Well, the best advertising reflects the way people are living their lives and the kind of lives that people aspire to. So it has a sense of realism and a sense of aspiration to it. And I think that will kind of define the creative elements that characterize advertising going forward. And so, yeah, we could certainly see people wearing masks in these ads. We could certainly see people practicing social distancing. I hadn't actually thought about the Hilltop ad as actually having social distancing, but I bet there was a few feet of separation between each of those people on all those hilltops. So, I think that's true, but I, just my personal opinion, but I think the best advertising is always aspirational. And, what is it that I really want out of my life? And I'm looking for something from an ad, from a brand that is something I can aspire to, something that I can really want to have. And, sort of dealing with the realities of a virus like this may or may not be aspirational. Again, I think it's a testable hypothesis, but it's certainly not out of the realm of possibility that we may see a different, a grittier kind of realism in a lot of the advertising that reflects the current moment.
And I had a chance to actually do a little bit of an audit this morning on some of the creative that's come about since the start of the pandemic. And there is this common theme of togetherness that almost universally they are going after this topic of togetherness. But how it is being expressed, how it is being creatively manifested is very different. It's more about the role of technology, more about the concept of how we come together, more of what it means at that higher order sort of benefit of togetherness and the emotional reward of togetherness, as opposed to us being in a room together holding hands or doing whatever.
Right.
There's a new interesting question that came in from the audience, and it is from someone who asks, so if I'm in a company that has never really done purpose advertising, and if in fact almost all advertising, at least during the acute, maybe even the recovery period, is going to have some element of purpose to it, what do I do? And specifically, he asked the question, what kind of research do I do in order to know what direction to take in terms of developing a purpose campaign?
Well, I'll just start.
Go for it, Walker.
I'm sorry. Yeah, so I'll just say one quick thing, and then the experts actually here, Ann and Sarah can tell you the rest. But Sarah mentioned it has to be about you. It has to be true to you. So I think the first thing is, don't think about purpose first. Think about you first, and think about something that is true to your brand, that can fulfill a public role in the marketplace. And I think that's perhaps a way to begin to think about it. And then, you know, the other elements can be layered on top of that. But being true to your brand is the only thing that ever makes purpose work. And I think that's the starting point. But let Sarah and Ann add some thoughts.
That is exactly where I was going to start as a starting point, because it's really, you know, finding the right strategy is about trying all those elements. So what's needed in the world right now in terms of acute needs, I think there's certain things that are very clear, right? So there's a need for, and brands are activating on it. So there's a need to raise awareness. There's a need to really support people, right? In their homes, in this kind of unprecedented moment that we're having. How do you make this better? And then action, like we really do need people to solve problems where there's shortages or where, you know, there's a need to transport things. So like understanding what you do, I think the brands that have really leaned into who they are, like Nike's Play for the World campaign, it's very much who they are, but it raised awareness. So it's probably one of the biggest places that they could impact right now is about spreading the word of like stay at home. And so really seeing who am I as a starting point, and then what needs to be done in the world, and where is that bridge and that link. And if you don't know where it is, it's like, it's really engaging with the people. And I think that's where, like, you know, who is it that you're seeking to help and how can you contribute, and co-creating solutions with them is a great way to find a pathway for your campaign that's going to be successful. It's a great time to start because if you haven't done it before, this is a good moment to jump in.
What kind of research might you do?
I think in terms of a starting point, starting with the brand, we do, I mean, you know, doing a sort of a deep dive into the brand as a first stage of research, but also you could speak with consumers, you could do expert interviews. And I think, you know, leaning into cultural insight as well. If we're seeing what are like the sort of emerging cultural trends right now, we definitely would do that in terms of helping develop creative or expression springboards for what a purpose campaign could be about. You know, it depends, I guess, on the timeline. So if you're thinking about what's happening, you know, right now, we need to do something kind of like, how do we activate? Utilizing the tools that are at hand, I think, are probably the best way to start. And then if you're talking about, you know, 18 months from now, what are we going to do? Really, you know, doing consumer research, understanding how attitudes are shifting and changing, and doing a cultural insight with a sort of foresight piece to crack what your purpose will look like, is how we'd approach it.
And I write.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. I really like using social media these days, and really listening to social media, because Sarah, you talked about cultural insights, which I think is critical in getting this right. But one of the things that social media does is it really does give us that moment in time understanding of what is important to individuals. So we talk about research, and it is hopefully a narrow moment in time. And what are the things that are immediately available that can help us chart the course? But something I would caution folks to is we have to be careful that this be a true purpose and not a crisis response. One of the things that I love about Dove, like we haven't talked about Dove. Dove is probably the original purpose campaign, and and it's been exhausted as a case study. But if you have not seen it, have a look at the video, Courage is Beautiful. It really demonstrates the power of a purpose and how a purpose is relevant for the long haul. Because what it's doing is it's showing nurses, physicians, people in hospital settings, and really helping you to recognize their courage and how important that is to us these days, and giving you an opportunity to participate and support them. So I would be careful to ensure that this isn't just a moment in time activity, that this is something that you can do for the long haul.
There was a question, I think it's probably more for Walker, about, I think one of your slides said that people will want brands to have this new brand ethic. Is there any empirical evidence of that, or is it just sort of what you're reading, what you're hearing?
Well, I mean, it's certainly all the stuff we're reading and hearing, and that kind of anecdotal evidence that we see. But it appears in our survey, and it appears in other people's surveys too. It's clear from our global monitor tracking that an increasing percentage of consumers want to see brands take a role like this. It's true in the Edelman Trust Barometer. It's true in the Conference Board study that I referenced that was done in 64 countries around the world. Our global monitor study is in about 24 countries. The Edelman Trust Barometer is in 8 countries. So no matter where you look around the world, you're seeing an increasing percentage of consumers who have put a priority on seeing something new from brands, which is stepping up to make a positive contribution to society at large. And I think they're leaving it up to brands to decide what that is going to be. But if they don't see that in the brand themselves, then there is a gap in the brand proposition relative to their expectations about what a brand should do in the world that we live in right now. And that's this kind of evolution of things. It is a layering on of things. We have not gotten away from delivering a better product. We have not gotten away from a brand that speaks to me and helps me be more fulfilled, more expressive. But we are now in a world where that's not enough. Or if that's the only thing you're doing, you are vulnerable to other brands who do that, plus step into this public role. So I think that's what we see in this kind of survey data. And then we see this anecdotally in things like the actions of the Business Roundtable, the annual letters that Larry Fink has been writing from BlackRock, and all these other things that are about just this broader social context within which people want to see some kind of social improvement. They are disappointed in the kind of institutions that are available and purposed with doing this now. And so they feel like this is a place where brands can make a real contribution. And brands have got to do that, unlike politicians. Politics is not a good model for brands. Politicians win with one more vote than the competition. Divide and conquer is a political strategy. Brands have got to unify. If brands want to grow, they've got to appeal to a broader base of people. And so brands have got a different kind of way in which they have to approach these responsibilities. And purpose is probably the best way in which brands can make that kind of public commitment.
Well, we're just about out of time. Sarah and Ann, any last comments you want to add to that?
I think what's interesting is become a moment of content creation. We talk about the emerging trends, and one of the emerging trends that we had been dealing with recently was this idea of there's content everywhere, and how do I create content? And I think that is only multiplied. So again, going beyond advertising to thinking about valuable experiences, valuable content, things that can really help people is going to be part of how your brand can embrace this journey of becoming a purpose brand.
Great, thank you. Well, we are out of time now, so let me just close with one or two reminders. We are recording this. The link should be up, and we'll be sending out the link, actually. You'll also be receiving a survey as soon as the session is done. Please let us know how it's a very short survey, 5 questions. It'll help us improve moving forward. And then finally, make sure you go to the website, download the presentation that you've seen today. So I wish to thank our panelists and speakers. It was a great presentation, and hope the virtual audience enjoyed and got a lot of value out of it, and look forward to seeing you very soon. And be safe and keep your distance, everyone. Good day.